The Building Show, where ideas connect. For 34 years, The Building Show is where people connect through Construct Canada, PM Expo, Home Builder Renovator Expo, and the World of Concrete Toronto Pavilion. Visit the Metro Toronto Convention Centre South from November 30th to December 2nd to make the connections which will give you a competitive edge. For more information, email events@informacanada.com or visit thebuildingshow.com.
Hello and welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and with me today I have
Ehren Cory, the CEO of the Canada Infrastructure Bank.
And we just came out of a session mostly about energy at the P3 conference 2022, which is the first in-person one since 2019. And that's kind of where I'll start. The reason it has been in person is COVID-19. I imagine the Infrastructure Bank had quite a few things to look at when the pandemic hit as well. So let's kind of go back in time and see what you guys had to readjust during that time.
For sure. Thanks, Warren. So the CIB was launched. Our first employee started in the middle of 2018, and in the early days, I think a lot of our focus was on working with public asset owners, municipalities, provinces, First Nations, Indigenous communities, and private sector owners to better understand their infrastructure needs, their project priorities, and places where the CIB could invest to make projects happen. And so really building a pipeline of projects and building a set of investment opportunities. And then COVID-19 happened, and that didn't make it easy to do that. And as a result, the first 2 years of our existence, we made one investment. We did a lot of good groundwork to build that pipeline, but still we had made one, and COVID, really added to that challenge. That, on the other hand, created a real opportunity, because I think for many of us in this industry, it was also a chance to really refocus on the projects of greatest need, the projects where that are really have good fundamentals but are stuck. And so that's the place where the CIB can be most impactful. So coming out of COVID, over the last now almost 2 years, that story has really changed. We're up to now, I think, 45 investment commitments across the country in every sector, in almost every province and territory. And so I think that's a testament to us being able to keep working with people through the pandemic. As I said, it kind of certainly threw a curveball into the ramp up of the CIB, but in the end, it's actually probably been a real positive in the sense that we've all been able to take a moment to pause and reflect on what's the infrastructure we need for the next, not just today, but the next 30 and 50 and 75 and 100 years.
And speaking of which, you said there's 5 areas you're concentrating on now. I assume that came out of pandemic planning as well. So maybe you could say what those are and we can go from there.
Absolutely. So yeah, there's 5 sectors we're focused in, and those are, and each of them are areas of infrastructure where a few things are true. 1, where we have great need. 2, where there is some opportunity for both public benefit, public outcomes, because that's what infrastructure actually is. It delivers public good, but also for some level of private investment and private participation, because the role of the CIB is to catalyze those projects and to make more of them happen faster, which in turn means that you need to put less traditional, let's say, public money, grants and taxpayer funded stuff into them, because we've created a market for them.
You actually mentioned that in the session, and that the best projects are the ones you don't have to invest in.
Exactly. There's no market failure, to use an economist term, and there's no problem, then that's great. And we build infrastructure in this country all the time without the CIB, and it's great. Public schools, our hospitals, there's lots of social infrastructure that gets built that way, but we're focused in the areas where we can actually catalyze investment, get more built, without investing taxpayers' money as much. So the 5 areas are, first, in transit systems, so anything in the public transit sphere, from electrification of fleets, electric buses and trains, but also whole system build-outs, expansions of existing transit systems. That's one. The second is what we call trade and transportation. So this would include the classic sort of linear infrastructure, rail and roads, but also ports and inland logistics and port facilities, so everything that grows economic wealth, let's put in that trade and transportation category. Third is broadband, getting every Canadian onto broadband and functioning high-speed internet. The fourth is in what we call clean power, so this is generation, transmission, energy storage, so everything in the clean power space. And the fifth one is what we call green infrastructure, which includes things like building retrofits and low carbon fuels and hydrogen, small modular reactors in the nuclear space, building retrofits really importantly, electric vehicle charging. So all of that, and water and wastewater, all of that is within green infrastructure. So those are the 5 sectors that we're focused in. And as I said, the reason we're focused in them is because they all have those similar characteristics.
And you pointed out during the session, which was primarily about energy, from what I could tell, that it's not, you can't, the way you put it was you can't export electrons. But you can actually export hydrogen and other fuels. So maybe you kind of go into that and
For sure.
CIB is involved.
Yeah, it's interesting. Canada has some incredible strengths. We through virtue of geography partially, and we have hydro assets in this country that are the envy of many parts of the world. We have a great and growing renewable sector. We have a really strong history of nuclear power as part of our non-emitting baseload power. So we have some really nice elements. As we electrify, demand for electricity is going to be 2 to 3 times what it is today in the not too distant future. So building from that really strong, clean base is important. And again, as you said, our best investment is one we don't make. There are lots of places that the CIB isn't needed. Renewable markets where there's power purchase agreements and there's a ability for those projects to happen. But in a number of those spaces, what we see is too much risk and uncertainty right now for people to make investments. It could be risk and uncertainty on what the revenue potential is. So you build a battery storage facility, it's really hard to predict right now how electricity markets are going to work. You build a big transmission line, it's hard to know how many electrons will flow over it. So there's that uncertainty. When it comes to Canada playing a role outside of our country and taking that core of what we've got and building, yes, faster in our domestic market, but also looking outside, that's where my comment around you can't export electrons, but you can export energy is true. And it's funny, Canada has a great tradition of this. And our world-leading position in the aluminum industry, if you'll allow me for a second, is actually an example of this, because aluminum is a really energy-intensive product. And the reason we've been a world leader in aluminum production is actually because we're a world leader in clean hydro in BC and Quebec in particular. So this is something that Canada knows well, the ability to convert into a value-added product our resources. So we see that potential in wind projects in Eastern Canada turned into a non-carbon-based fuel for places that need it, like Europe. We see it in Western Canada to be able to take some of our energy assets and export them to places like Asia. So there's real potential in that. The CIB is focused on building infrastructure in Canada and to the benefit of Canadians, but benefited Canadians can work in both ways. One is for our own domestic consumption, but also for international opportunity.
And this might be recency bias because I hear a lot of talk this morning about nuclear power, but it seems like it's having a moment in a way because there's a lot more talk than there used to be about it, and maybe you could go into that and the CIB's role.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Warren, and I think 2 things I'll say about that. One, the nuclear industry has a long track record in Canada and around the world. It's a mixed track record historically, and we all know the stories of cost overruns and challenges. We also know that it comes with environmental challenges of its own. What we can say, though, is that first, I think in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a real turnaround story in the nuclear industry, and it's one that's probably underappreciated. But as Mike Renchek on the panel was saying, they have essentially rebuilt from basically stripped down to its guts. The Bruce facility, which is the largest, I think, operating nuclear facility in the world. Darlington has gone through a similar transformation, Point Lepreau in New Brunswick as well. And I think through that experience, we've actually learned a lot about construction means and methods and how to deliver these incredibly complex projects with much more certainty and predictability. And I think you will note that we haven't heard a bunch of stories about cost overruns and that sort of thing in the Bruce and OPG refurbishments. And that's a testament to that industry, and I think that de-risks them to the point where people can actually now talk about being ambitious about building new nuclear. And it wasn't really something that I think you could talk about in polite company 15 years ago.
Or even closer. Yeah.
Or even closer. So I give that industry great credit. Now, on the other hand, there's still a lot of uncertainty that come with these projects. And they are uncertainties still related to technology evolution, getting down the learning curve. When you're doing small modular reactors, we're really among the first in the world to go down this path at industrial scale. There's lots of lots of smaller demonstrations and that sort of thing. But if we want to do this at scale, that's the kind of catalytic thing that the CIB can help step in and do by us providing some financing for that project. We're going to share in how that evolves. We're going to help OPG to do it in a low-cost way, and future ones, OPG, Bruce, or elsewhere in the country may or may not need the CIB, because again, that's that idea that we're in just long enough to prove out a market, get over that uncertainty or risk premium. Once the risk premium is gone, lots of other people could invest their money to get it done.
Another thing that has been mentioned in previous sessions is that, supply chains and inflation are one thing. A tunnel has to last 200 years. So it's not that it's irrelevant, but it's going to be less relevant as time goes on, or it's going to be one factor amongst many. But the CIB is also spending taxpayer money, so you've got to be a little more careful about that. So what's the CIB take on that?
Yeah, so obviously, you're exactly right. Infrastructure projects have to take a long-term view, but we are investing taxpayer money, and it is true investment. We're making loans or equity investments to get paid back with interest. And the idea is that we should be providing that investment in ways that no one else could or would. We are doing it at a discount, whether that's because we're taking on risk that other investors wouldn't, or we're providing lower cost financing, or we're doing it for longer. Sometimes what we're able to do is defer our repayment. So that's another way that we can help improve the prospects of a project by us just deferring. So the CIB, that's what we're doing with our tools. It's still an investment. We're still like a lender. We still have to worry about things like interest rates. I think what's interesting, Warren, is we are always trying to figure out how much money do we need to put in and how much value do we need to put in terms of risk we take or lower interest rates that we provide. Think of that as the value we're putting in to make a deal happen. And we're trying to put in the littlest amount possible to make a project happen. As inflation and cost escalation has hit these projects, the gap for many of these projects has gotten a little bit bigger. Right? So in some ways, the demand for the CIB is even higher in those kind of environments. And the math we're doing is it still good payback for taxpayers for us to put our money in? And we think of payback, of course, in a different way than other investors, because our payback is tons of GHG emissions reduced, number of new transit riders, number of new homes connected to broadband. But the question we have to ask is, the project has gotten more expensive, the gap that the project has gotten bigger. How much of that gap are we willing to fill to make the project happen, to buy the outcome that it plans to have in those metrics? Often I say to people, like, we're an ROI investor just like every other investor in the world. The difference is we define our R differently. So the math we're having to do in an inflationary world is the R isn't changing. It's still the same number of transit riders. It's still the same number of GHGs that the project reduces from our energy grid, etc. So the R isn't changing, but the demand for us is going up. Does the ROI calculation still work? And sometimes the answer is no. And so that limits how much I'm willing to put into a project. Okay. And the project then hopefully can still make it work. But that's our capital management philosophy, is what's the least amount of money we can put in to get the return. And it's definitely been under pressure in the last 18 months as we've seen inflation and cost escalation happen.
Electrification gets a whole lot of attention for good reason, but one panelist mentioned, and you agreed with them, that it's not everything. There are other ways like landfills and other ways to get decarbonized. So maybe you could go into some of the decarbonization stuff that isn't electricity based. Of course.
And I think, keeping our pathways open is a really important general principle. But for us, the exploration of things like hydrogen and low carbon fuel. So on the panel we were talking about things like renewable diesel, things that are life cycle neutral, that still function in a combustion engine. So you think of some of our industries, Warren, like air transport, shipping. These are heavy-duty transportation, even long-haul rail country. Over a very big country. It is going to take all of the above. And I think some of those harder to decarbonize spaces, electrification is a long way away, just given what we know about technology, battery performance, battery weight. To do a trans-Pacific flight on an electric plane is a thing that we don't
It'll
have
happen,
the capability to
but who
do.
knows when,
That's
yeah.
right. I'm a young guy, but I'm not sure I'm young enough to see that. But what I am young enough to see is us to push other forms of decarbonization, like a renewable fuel. So there's a lot of work on sustainable aviation fuel. There's a lot of work in the shipping industry around renewable diesel or renewable fuels in general. So the CIB is also putting part of our portfolio into those types of investments because it's going to take all of the above to get to the economy and environment we want to have.
Okay, and the people listening to this are people in the industry, people who are interested in what CIB has to say. So any final words for people at the higher levels of the construction industry?
Well, I think it's really interesting. We've, as I said, over the last few years, our deal flow has picked up, and as because of that, we're talking to project owners and proponents across the country. The thing I would like to say is the CIB, the Canada Infrastructure Bank, our job is to get those outcomes I described earlier: better connectivity of Canadians, a more sustainable economy, build infrastructure that benefits our northern, remote, and Indigenous communities. And these are our R in our ROI calculation. We are always looking for projects that deliver those across this country. And so if you're a project owner or a proponent of a project and want to talk, we are always open for business and open for dialogue around what the project is and what's currently sticking it from happening and what the CIB could contribute to unsticking it.
Thanks for joining us today, Ehren.
Thank you.